The invitation had been quiet. A one-line email from his team. Kimmel wants to book you. Promo slot. Light segment. Clean. Johnny Depp read it twice. Then said nothing. He didn't nod. Didn't flinch. Just deleted the message. Because he already knew what the segment would be. 6 minutes. 1 chair. 2 jokes. 3 safe questions. Followed by applause that meant nothing. But 2 days later, he said yes. Not to promote. Not to play. But because something inside him was tired of being reduced to mythology. And tired men don't raise their voices. They hold the room until it can't laugh past them anymore. When he walked into the studio, the band was rehearsing. Someone from production asked if he needed makeup. He declined. Wardrobe? He gestured to the black shirt he was already wearing. I brought mine. The crowd filled in fast. Jimmy's monologue landed like clockwork. Banter. Punchlines. Subtle digs. Then came the turn. And now, our next guest. The audience leaned in. He's legendary. He's unpredictable. He's the reason eyeliner sales still spike every Halloween. Laughter. Jimmy grinned. Please welcome the man, the myth, the maybe too real for late night, Johnny Depp. The curtain opened. Johnny walked out slowly. No wave. No smile. No gesture for the crowd. He looked like someone who didn't come for the format and had no intention of being shaped by it. Jimmy stood to greet him. Johnny shook his hand once. Flat. Quiet. Then sat. Jimmy smiled wide. Johnny Depp, everybody. Applause. Johnny looked at the crowd. Then back at Jimmy. He didn't grin. He didn't thank the audience. He said, let's just skip the costume party. Jimmy blinked. I'm sorry. Johnny's voice stayed calm. You want the version of me that makes this easy. I didn't bring him. The room stirred. Jimmy laughed lightly. Well, I was hoping for a version that wouldn't burn the segment to the ground. Johnny leaned back. Then maybe you should have invited a character. That line didn't raise tension. It removed all pretense. And for the first time in a long time, Jimmy Kimmel wasn't steering. He was holding the mic, but not the moment. Jimmy Kimmel adjusted in his chair. Just slightly. He wasn't nervous. Not yet. But something in the segment had shifted. And he hadn't moved it. He smiled. Okay, let's take the pressure off. You've got a new film. It's getting attention. Critics say it's the most personal work you've done in years. Johnny nodded once. Then said, critics love the word personal when they can't name what's real. Jimmy chuckled. All right. So what is it then? It's not content. That's what I know. The laughter didn't come because Johnny wasn't performing, and the room was starting to notice. Jimmy reached for the card on his desk. Let me just get this out of the way. You've had a complicated few years. Some people say this is your comeback. Is that fair? Johnny answered without blinking. Comeback is a word you use when you think someone needed permission to return. Jimmy leaned in. So you didn't? No. I just stopped asking the wrong rooms to welcome me. That one held. The audience didn't know what to do with it. No cheer. No groan. Just stillness. Jimmy smiled again, thinner. You know, you've got a reputation for being hard to pin down. Johnny tilted his head. That's what happens when people mistake refusal for confusion. Jimmy tried to pivot. Well, I gotta say, you're more serious than I expected. That's because I stopped laughing at the parts of my life people keep turning into punchlines. That line didn't sting. It didn't jab. It just stayed, exactly where Jimmy couldn't sidestep it. And now, the interview wasn't in his control. It was in Johnny's calm, unflinching, and fully unwilling to shrink for a late-night chair. Jimmy Kimmel sat back. He glanced toward the band. No cue. They were watching, too. Because something was happening here, and it wasn't entertainment. It was presence. He tried again. You're not making this easy. Johnny looked at him. Maybe that's the problem. It was never supposed to be easy. Jimmy chuckled, but it came hollow. You know the format. We talk, we laugh, we move on. It works. Johnny said. For who? That one didn't land like a question. It landed like an indictment. Jimmy shifted. Okay, then what would you rather do? Sit in silence and stare at the audience. Johnny didn't blink. I'd rather say something that costs me something, even if no one claps. A few people in the crowd exhaled. Not laughter, just release. Like they'd been waiting for someone to say that out loud. Jimmy tapped a card against the desk. You've had your words twisted before. Are you sure you want to do this live? Johnny said. If a room has to be edited to hold a full sentence, it was never safe to speak in. Jimmy looked at him. Harder this time. You realize where you are, right? This is a comedy show. Johnny nodded. And that's what makes this sad. Jimmy blinked. Sad. That people come here to forget. And you serve them the version of a man who's easy to laugh at, even when he's still bleeding. The air flattened. No one clapped. No one stirred. Because everyone understood that wasn't about promotion. That was about refusal. Refusal to flinch. Refusal to bend. And Jimmy Kimmel didn't have a line for that. He only had a chair. And a guest who wasn't trying to stay in it. Jimmy Kimmel looked toward the control booth. A small motion, nearly invisible. But Johnny saw it. He smiled. Not wide. Not smug. Just enough to show he knew what that glance meant. You looking for a signal, Jimmy? Jimmy straightened. No. Just checking time. Then let me save you some. I'm not going to wrap this in a soundbite. The audience didn't laugh. Not because they were tense. Because they were finally quiet. Jimmy leaned forward. You know, I'm trying here. I bring you on. I set the stage. And you give me this. Resistance. Johnny's voice stayed level. You didn't bring me on. You summoned the version of me you thought would cooperate. Jimmy raised his eyebrows. And which version did I get? Johnny said. The one who got tired of watching people clip his grief into internet montages. That sentence didn't echo. It didn't land. It stayed. And Jimmy Kimmel, for the first time in years, had nothing to tag it with. No punchline. No pivot. No laugh track to rescue the room. Just a man in black, seated across from him, who wasn't angry. Just finished. Jimmy looked at his cards. Then let them go. They slid across the desk. Johnny watched them fall. Jimmy asked, What now? Johnny said, Now you decide whether this was ever supposed to be a conversation, or just a costume party. Jimmy didn't answer, because everyone in the room already knew. Jimmy Kimmel looked into the camera, then looked away. He wasn't out of words. He was out of rhythm. Johnny Depp hadn't yelled, hadn't interrupted, hadn't provoked. He had just refused to cooperate. And somehow, that broke the format more completely than any outburst could. Jimmy cleared his throat. Well, I think that's all we've got time for. Johnny didn't move, didn't thank him, didn't nod for the audience. He just sat there, still, present. Jimmy added, softer. Johnny Depp, everybody. There was a pause, then a few claps. Not because the audience approved, because they didn't know what else to do. Johnny stood, buttoned his coat, and walked off stage without looking back. No exit wave, no applause cue, no handshake. He didn't walk out like a man who had been kicked off. He walked out like someone who was done lending himself to the edit. Backstage, a producer looked toward the director. Do we cut that? The director said. If we cut that, we cut the only part that mattered. The episode aired in full. No promo, no caption, no voiceover. Just the segment, raw and unpolished. Online, it didn't trend. It settled, shared with comments like, this wasn't confrontation. This was reclamation. He didn't blow up. He just didn't bow. Stillness that made late night feel small. In a film school lecture weeks later, a professor paused the interview and asked, What just happened here? A student answered. One person showed up. The other showed format. Jimmy Kimmel never referenced it again. But on the next night's episode, his monologue was slower. The jokes didn't chase applause. And when the next guest answered quietly, he didn't interrupt. Because part of him knew, some rooms can only be exposed by the people who stop playing along. Johnny Depp never posted about the interview. Never explained it. Never softened it. When asked off camera what he thought of it, he said, I didn't say anything wild. I just stopped making myself palatable. And somehow, that was the loudest thing anyone had heard on late night in years.